Damn stone. I was born in a small town and would probably have died there too, ending my life in my prime from drinking, like many locals, if not for my childhood friend Cot, or rather Caustic. At around 13, he visited a big city with his parents for the first time and became obsessed with it. While the kids dreamed of mysterious islands and treasures, he was fascinated by the bustling anthill that had everything he thought was necessary for happiness. After school, he persuaded me to try a different life, and we moved to the capital. At first, it was tough dorms, part-time jobs, studying. But then things took off. First, good earnings. We started a business together. I got married soon, but Cot never did. Girls flocked to him, but with the knight he successfully portrayed came a difficult character, jealousy, and the principle of if to love, then a queen. He always joked that if he ever married, it would be to Sharon Stone. Life was getting better. I even moved my family closer. But Kostya didn't make it. His parents died. He went to bury them and disappeared. Cot returned 3 months later, haggard and exhausted. He offered to sell his share in the business. He said he wanted to go back home. I was astonished. He could call Moscow his home, but not that godforsaken place we once miraculously escaped from. He referred to it with undisguised hatred as USD's Zhapinsk and insisted his parents visit him instead of going there himself. And who, in their right mind, would leave the capital for a miserable town surviving on a single outdated factory that was about to close? He also said he couldn't sleep in Moscow, but there the air was fresh, and he caught up on all his sleep over the years. And yet, he had such bags under his eyes. I tried to talk sense into him, at least to persuade him not to sell his apartment and not to deregister. No way. He wouldn't listen to reason. He threatened me, hissing for me not to interfere in his life. I fought his sudden madness and eventually gave up. To hell with it. If he wanted to ruin his life, fine. I reluctantly bought his share, and we had a terrible fight. 3 months later, he called as if nothing had happened and invited me to his wedding. I, of course, agreed. Finally, there was a logical explanation for his departure. But for such a rational, cold-blooded, and intelligent person to lose his head over a woman so completely, I didn't know. Even if he had truly found himself a Sharon Stone in the backwoods. And damn, how accurate found turned out to be. Pale, not exactly ugly, but gray and unremarkable, with thin hair and a ponytail, plump, short. She was afraid of everyone, spoke quietly and mostly nonsense, had less intellect than beauty. Almost Sharon Stone, right? And there was Cot, tall, charming, pleasant-looking, athletic, always stylishly dressed, well-read, and passionate about history and archaeology. I was shocked, although I did have one thought. Is it a shotgun wedding? I approached him at the wedding when he was smoking on the back porch of a shabby restaurant. No, you wouldn't believe it. Cot lifted his tired, dead eyes to me. I just can't be without her. I know it sounds awful. I feel almost physical discomfort without her. I suspect it's not love. I don't know what it is. But sometimes you just have to go with fate. His response was more than strange. But I couldn't get anything more coherent out of him. During the days I stayed with them, he would talk about anything except his wife. He shared plans to renovate his parents' house and invited me to visit in the summer. And yes, now we called each other, and he would eagerly ask about my news and the company's affairs. But he categorically refused any suggestions to come back even for a while. He increasingly invited me to visit, and in the end of June, he finally convinced me. Business had been getting worse since his departure, and dusty Moscow pressed down with its scorching asphalt. Going to the countryside seemed like such a good idea, especially since my wife and kids had gone to visit her parents at the sea. From that last meeting 6 months ago, my friend looked noticeably better. He was smiling again, content, almost purring like a real cat. The rickety house of his parents had turned into a solid 2-story cottage. When did he manage to do all that? The house, I should say, was at the very edge of the town. Beyond our street, there was a steep descent down to the river and fields. No one built anything there. The soil was bad. We played there as children. It was a desolate and eerie place. People often drowned in that part of the river. Adults explained it with underground springs of icy water. If someone got caught in the current of an underground spring, their legs would cramp. And, in winter, it was obvious thin ice. Everyone knew it was a bad place for swimming, but the river claimed 5 to 6 lives a year. Among children, there were silly ghost stories about evil spirits dragging people underwater. The stories had a good reason. On the opposite shore, the charred remains of a burned village could still be seen. The evil spirits from the village and the Devil's Stone were almost landmarks in our backwater. It was to this last place that our feet led us on our first nature outing. We were just walking aimlessly and chatting. The Devil's Stone is a huge boulder on the riverbank, with strange symbols carved into it. There were many stories about it, mostly about various pagan rituals. And they were probably not far from the truth. We had found small animals with their throats slit and bird feathers on it several times. I don't know if it was a sacrifice or if someone just wanted to scare kids away from a dangerous place. They said the stone could grant a wish in exchange for something valuable. Of course, no one believed it. I remember from childhood how my classmate Linka buried her favorite doll nearby, crying and asking for her parents to stop drinking. It didn't come true, of course. A strange thing, though I thought that over time, under its enormous weight, the stone would have sunk into the sand at least a quarter. Sitting on the high bluff, I complained to Cod about how bad things were, begged him to come back, and he silently watched the water. Then a foolish thought struck me. I stood up, placed both hands on the stone, and loudly asked the universe for money to solve my problems. A lot, quickly, and without any consequences for me. Cod found it amusing. He said he'd think about it since I'd already decided to ask the devil for money. That evening, over homemade plum wine, he offered to help me with his savings. But my situation wasn't so dire as to empty a friend's accounts, especially since there was no work in this hole. He probably planned to live on those savings, and I still hoped he would return to the capital. And suddenly, pride flared up. What, couldn't I do anything without him? Looking for a new topic for conversation, I glanced around the kitchen, noting that it lacked a woman's touch. Everything was neat and clean. Cot was always meticulous about that, but it lacked something cozy, homely, like some embroidery, for example, and there were no feminine things in the bathroom. I cautiously inquired, "Have you and Svetka been apart for long?" "No, we didn't part. She drowned at the beginning of May." Cot opened the window and, returning to the table, lit a cigarette. A rare sight. I never remembered him smoking indoors. We were already living here. We had a fight in the evening. She ran outside in a fit. I followed her, thought I'd make up, but the fog was so thick that no matter how much I walked, I kept coming back to the house. In the morning, downstream. He paused and reached into the drawer for another bottle. They found her. Fool, calming her nerves with a swim in the cold water at night. I still see her sometimes. I felt a chill run down my spine. He said it in such a casual, everyday voice, as if he were asking for the time. Forcing a smile, I moved the bottle away from him. Cod appreciated the joke, laughed, and lighting another cigarette, headed for the porch. The fog was thickening. It was a frequent visitor in this lowland area. That's where I see Svetka. It seems like she's standing there, calling out. Then she goes down to the river. Believe it or not, I've wanted to leave 100 times already, at least to the town center, but I keep waiting for this damn fog every evening. If only I had found her then. See, over there. There. He frantically waved his hand towards the river, but I couldn't see anything. Just a continuous haze. Then Cot suddenly darted off towards the river, completely out of it, and I barely managed to grab him and pull him back into the house. Under the bright light of the kitchen chandelier, he seemed to come to his senses, apologized, and went to bed. The next week and a half flew by almost unnoticed. A comfortable house, nature, fresh air, healthy food, and Cot was quite the entertainer. In general, I didn't want to return to Moscow, but I had to. And it would have been better if I hadn't. If I had just disappeared somewhere in the wilderness. Everything went wrong, everything was falling apart no matter what I did, and my youngest daughter fell seriously ill. In just a month, my whole life collapsed into debt. Creditors started making threats. My wife was afraid to leave the house. I decided to sell the apartment. And the final blow, a call with the news of Cot's death. I sat there with a blank expression, listening to something about an inheritance, a will, unable to even imagine that this could ever happen. He was closer to me than any of my relatives. I don't remember how I got there. Straight to the cemetery. Even his wife's relatives had buried him. I found out too late. I talked to him about something. And God, even standing by his grave, I desperately didn't want to believe it. Everything was like in a fog. It turned out he had left me his house and a 2-bedroom apartment in the city center. I didn't even know about the latter. Seems he really did want to move away from his foggy visions. I went to his house. It was already getting dark, so I went straight to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange noise downstairs, thinking burglars had broken into the officially empty house. What was there to take? I was more surprised no one had broken in before. I grabbed a steel rod used for adjusting the curtains and went to the first floor. But no one was there. I must have imagined it or dreamt it. Just as I was about to relax and put my foot on the stairs to the second floor, there was a clatter in the kitchen. I rushed there, turned on the light, and was stunned. Caught was sitting at the table. Not a zombie, not a corpse, but my friend, alive and well. Just a bit pale. He smiled and gestured for me to sit. I didn't sit, I collapsed into a chair, gripping the steel rod like a lifeline, holding me back from either fainting or losing my mind. Caught, alive, did they bury someone else by mistake? Or was a ghost wandering around my kitchen? I stopped short at that thought. It was his kitchen, not mine, and as if reading my thoughts, he smiled even wider and said quietly, "So will the house and the apartment cover the debts? Or should I have left you the car too?" His voice, his intonations, but so empty. He smiled with his mouth and eyes, but his voice was empty, colorless. He poured me a glass of his homemade wine, still smiling, and I thought I would go mad. I downed the glass in one gulp and clutched the rod again. Caught reached for a newspaper, tore off a piece, wrote something, and placed it in front of me. I read run and woke up in a cold sweat, shaking violently. It was 3 a.m, the usual fog outside. Just a dream. Calming myself, I went to the kitchen to get some water. I stumbled at the entrance. There was my life-saving steel rod. I turned on the light, an empty bottle and an overturned glass on the table. Under the glass was something. Exactly, a piece of newspaper with the word run screaming from it. I woke up around 6 a.m, in my car, clutching the metal icon of St. Nicholas the Wonder Worker that I had previously stuck to the dashboard. Was it a dream, a hallucination, or delirium? I convinced myself to get out and walk towards the house. Or did I see something? There it stands in the mist, waving, calling out. Caught. I don't know what I was thinking then, or if I was thinking at all, but I followed him. I walked and walked and walked. It felt like the devil was leading me in circles for an eternity, laughing with my friend's voice, calling out. I seemed to understand that it wasn't caught, but I desperately struggled, as if catching the ghost would bring my friend back. Did I believe it? I never believed in anything more strongly or foolishly mystical than I did then. It was very cold, but I didn't feel it until someone abruptly pulled me back. Turns out I was already standing almost waist deep in icy water next to the Devil's Stone, and some old man was pulling me by the hand. A stroke of luck, a neighbor saw me running towards the river and followed. I told him everything, expecting him to call the sanitarium, but he just shook his head. He said there are many fools who go to the stone, and they fish them out later, or their loved ones taking the most precious thing, he says. He said Caught was a knowledgeable man. Not for our kind, listen to Caught. I looked at him incredulously. How can I listen when he's dead? The old man just shrugged. He said his wife was a fool, just like me. I warmed up at the cemetery. I don't know what I was waiting to see there. An open grave? Another apparition? Caught's statue was looking at me from the monument. Next to it was his wife's grave, a colorless mouse that no one would have noticed if it weren't for her coveted wish, granted in the right place. But devils can't bring love on a silver platter, no matter how much you wish for it. They only take what's theirs. Just yesterday, I wouldn't have believed in such nonsense, but now, this explanation for his departure was almost the only and most logical one. I later sold the inheritance, of course. It saved my skin, but I still often dream of searching for my friend in the fog, feeling like he's right there, reaching out but always slipping away. And I hear that laughter. And that question, will it cover the debts? I'm afraid to go to the kitchen at night. He's sometimes there, smiling, advising, always accurate, but I'm so afraid of him. And of myself. How difficult it is to live with this guilt, pressing on my chest like the weight of the Devil's Stone. How scary it is to fall asleep when those horrible nightmares haunt me, when the cursed fog beckons me.